first 4 corridors will take up more than 3 times the land of all the existing interstates in the entire state today. It's just a huge amount of, almost incomprehensible amount of land. And on that land, the intention is to put 10 lanes separated into sets. So there's 4 sets of lanes, 6 rail lines, an area that is reserved for utilities, underground pipelines, and overhead power lines, and then additional land as buffers. And so it's a 1/4 mile wide, a 1/4 mile in width from side to side. It will be fenced, it will have barriers, it won't be accessible, it doesn't have frontages, it's not like an interstate where the property next to it can develop as a business because there won't be any way to get there. The entire project doesn't have a single on-ramp or off-ramp in the plan. You access it by where it intersects existing major highways. So you'll have like a clover leaf to get you on and off. So the land that it passes through, it will just cut a swath. It will cut roads. Some roads may cross it. If they do, they have to cross it as an overpass because it is a large, flat, straight corridor to accommodate the rail elements primarily. And those overpasses will be very expensive. And if you're the toll road operator, there's no return on investment for an overpass that just crosses over your project. And so they're not going to want to spend money, the state's not going to want to spend money, and you're not going to have every road that went from point A to point B getting there anymore. And then within that corridor, they'll also put concessions, your typical gas stations and fast foods, but the plan specifically calls for it to have hotels even, to where you may travel across the state of Texas or other states that it goes through in the future and never get off. You'll stay on there as captive revenue generators for the concessionaire and for the state. And so it's tough to envision because there isn't anything like it. It's massive. It is not a single road. It is a network of corridors that crisscross the state of Texas and end up at the borders of all the neighboring states and Mexico. And the only place that any formal discussions of extension today have occurred have been with Mexico. The TransTexas Corridor is not a toll road. Toll roads are a component of the TransTexas Corridor. Rail is a component of the TransTexas Corridor. By the way, that's toll rail. For the first time, be state-owned rail or concessionaire-owned rail that is rented and tolled just like they toll a highway. That will change the dynamics of how railroad works in Texas and perhaps in the country. It has a utility corridor. Utilities run in state right-of-way on highways all over the state. And you get a permit to put those in and you have to maintain them, but the state doesn't charge you rent. In the TransTexas Corridor, the state or the state's concessionaire will charge you rent or a toll, a fee on those utilities. And who pays those fees? Well, of course, the users of the utilities. That will be us.
You have a utility component, you have a water component. So you can do the TransTexas Corridor without it being a road, and you can take that land and use it to move water around the state without ever putting in any kind of a road. So people won't necessarily see something physically tangible that is the TransTexas Corridor, and you might not even realize it when you drive down it if it's ever finished and you look out to the side. You may not realize that all that land that you see out there doesn't belong to an individual anymore. It belongs to the state.
But this isn't just a Texas project. The TransTexas Corridor starts at Mexico and goes north, and it really is not very conceivable that we'll have 10 lanes and all of these rail lines that stop at the Oklahoma border or the Louisiana border or New Mexico border. They're going to continue on somewhere, and it's part of a bigger picture.
That was the biggest heartbreak when we first heard about it, is realizing how few people knew anything about it.
But let's look at reality. Look at how many miles of interstate we have in Texas. We have about 4,000 miles of interstate. And go along those interstates and see just how many miles you can't easily expand because of dense construction. Well, you know, it's a very, very small percentage. There is a planning document that's being used that has established that it's 1,000 to 1,200 feet wide, although they've really settled on 1,200 feet wide, which is 3 times wider than the right-of-way taken for all but the absolute largest sections of interstate in the state of Texas. Most interstates are 300 to 400 foot wide. This highway is not going to do all of the things that they say it's going to do on day one, and it's not going to do anything positive for the people who are affected. Highways should be built where they're needed. They should be built to serve people. You know, the congestion is in our metropolitan centers. Our metropolitan centers need the extra lanes. Rural Texas is not congested. The interstates through rural Texas have ample land adjacent for expansion. That's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be doing it this way because this way generates more money, and that's what this is about. This is not about serving rural Texas or urban Texas or Texans at all. It's about generating money.
And what for? So that somebody can move something from Mexico to Canada? Is this all part of a decision made at a much higher level that we will be just a conduit to move things across the United States to benefit somebody else? I mean, this is a big burden to place on Texans, and this is taking Texas land away from Texas ranchers and farmers.
Our neighbors have owned and ranched on their land for 5 or 6 generations. That's what they do for a living. Even those who went off to college and came back, that's what they do. And if you destroy the viability of not only their home, but their ranch, that's their income. They can't go look in the classified ads in Dallas and say, wanted ranch owner, and be able to transplant themselves. You've destroyed a way of life, a career. That's really a very terrible thing to do, particularly when you're taking so much land that you don't even know what you're going to do with it. It's one thing if you're taking 90 or 100 feet for a farm to market road, or you're taking 300 to 400 feet for an interstate. But when you're taking 1,200 feet and you right up front say, we're just going to build 4 truck lanes. That's all we're going to build today, and we'll do the rest when it becomes viable. Is that in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years? Will it ever happen? It's unconscionable that the state of Texas would do this to its own citizens.